Can you hear the audio?
Yes, it's still on.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Hello, Venerable. Everyone, welcome to everybody to the Sunday morning teachings of Gyalten Lekden on Acharya Shantideva's A Bodhisattva Way of Life. Thank you, Venerable, for spending time with us this morning and teaching us about this great text.
Thank you so much, Dipti. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. Let's take a moment to be very intentional and to recognize that no matter where we are in the world, no matter what space we're occupying, the fact that we're coming together to study the Buddha Dharma, that we are engaging in a spiritual practice, we want to make that an intentional space, not an accidental activity. And so we want to take any of our worldly experiences that we've been doing today, whatever running around we've been doing, whatever breakfast we have very greedily been enjoying, and put that all to the side and allow all of our attention and all of our intention to be very clear and focused on our study together and on the sacred space that we create when we engage in spiritual practice. And while we have set that intentionality, then we'll also set a strong motivation that the reason we are coming together today, the reason we are studying the Dharma, the reason we are looking at our minds is so we can benefit others. It's not simply that we can find experience benefit in our own life, that we might simply experience peace or calm or relaxation in our own life, but it's so that we might be able to be of service to others. And we recognize that the more contentment we have, the more satisfaction we have, that will give us more resources and opportunities to be of benefit to others. But the goal is not for our own benefit alone, not for our benefit in this life, and not even for our own freedom from samsara, but it is for the liberation of all sentient beings for samsara. And in order to achieve that, we need to become Buddhas. We need to perfect our minds and complete the collections of wisdom and bodhicitta, or merit rather, so that we might have the best resources available that will allow us to be of service to others. So, as we sit down today to continue studying this text, to continue studying our minds, let's do so with the motivation that I'm here today, not merely for my own benefit, but so that I might be of the maximum benefit to others. I might tame my mind so I can be of service to others. That is my ultimate goal. So set that motivation strongly. With that, let us offer preliminary prayers. So we'll start with refuge and bodhicitta, which we'll offer 3 times in Tibetan and then once in English. And then we will continue with the other prayers in English. Sangye cheran soki chonam la jancho pardo dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinso gi pe sonam gi drola penche sangye drup har shok. Sangye cheran soki chonam la jancho pardo dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinso gi pe sonam gi Jola Penchir Sange Drupar Shok Sange Chiran Soki Chonam La Chanchu Bardu Dagni Kyabsu Chi Dagi Jinsogi Pesonam Gi Drola Penchir Sange Drupar Shok. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and I rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain unto the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits, those of all others, to the great enlightenment. Now we'll offer a short mandala offering, which we'll do once in Tibetan and then once in English. 사시필기 조이싱메도 트람리라블링시 니인데게 파디 상계신두 믹테와이 조그나만닥싱하 제발로. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Radam Mandala Kam Niryatayami. Now we'll continue with praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata and knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides, and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you, who are wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, forms supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, Homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see, condition things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, where they are perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. And we'll offer the Heart Sutra as well to help align our mind with the understanding of emptiness. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagwan was dwelling on massive Vulture's Mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagwan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to train in the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. No visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomena. There is no eye element, and so on up to and including no mind element, and also no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable perfect complete enlightenment in reliance upon the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as the truth since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Tayata om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagwan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated, and even the Tathagatas rejoice. Then the Bhagwan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that which had been spoken by the Bhagavan. Finally, the short prayer to help avert obstacles to our study and to our practice. I prostrate to the gathering of dakinis and the three chakras who abide in the holy yoga of using space. By your powers of clairvoyance and magical emanation, look after practitioners like a mother her child. Akasamarta Shadara Samaraya Pe, Akasamarta Shadara Samaraya Pe, Akasamarta Shadara Samaraya Pe, Akasamarata Shadara Samaraya Petayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Swaha. By the teaching of the three supreme jewels possessing the power of truth, may inner and outer hindrances be transformed, may they be dispelled, may they be pacified. Shintam Kuriya Swaha. May all negative forces opposed to Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accord with the Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here, right now. Great. Thank you so much. As usual, I'll just remind everyone that I'm very much open to questions. I'll have some time at the end for questions, but you're welcome to ask questions as we go along. Um, if there's something you don't understand, or if a point I make isn't clear, feel free to ask a question. Try to keep the questions on topic with whatever it is we're discussing, right? And if you have kind of a queue of questions that build up, then maybe just ask the most important ones to make sure other people get a chance to ask questions if they'd like. And if you have further questions, you can always email me if it requires kind of a more in-depth answer, you know? Uh, and I'm not really good at seeing when people raise their hand or when people put something in the chat, so I won't notice if you do one of those things. So if you have a question, it's okay to just interrupt me. That's fine. And if it's an inappropriate time, I'll say so. But otherwise, that's okay. As we prepare to continue exploring this text together, let's try to adopt three qualities that Aryadeva teaches in his 400 verses about what it means to be a appropriate student or a good student. So a good student or excellent student, as they say, has the three qualities of first being nonpartisan, right? So not having prejudiced views that they bring into their engagement with the Dharma, being open to learning new things. That doesn't mean not being skeptical. That doesn't mean accepting everything without questioning it, but it means not carrying your own views and imposing them against the Dharma, right? So actually engaging with the teachings themselves, being nonpartisan. The second quality of an excellent student is that they're intelligent, right? And so what we mean by being intelligent is that obviously to some extent that's not something we can control, but what it means in this context is that we are actively seeking out knowledge, right? That we actually want to learn, we want to improve our minds, we want to improve our understanding. That we're not just attending teachings to kind of get the good vibes like that, but we're actively seeking out understanding and knowledge. And in addition to being non-prejudiced or non-partisan and intelligent, we need to be diligent. So we have to have a sense of joy with which we pursue and exert effort into our studies and into our practice. Right. So let's try to keep those three qualities of an excellent student at the front of our mind now, especially since we're together in this class, but at any time. We want to embody these, not just when we're in class, not just when we're studying a text, but all the time. We should always try to have a non-prejudiced outlook. We should always try to be intelligent and seeking more information. And we should always be exerting joyful effort and find joy in the effort it takes to improve our mind and to pursue a spiritual life. Right? So we need to embody these qualities all the time, not just when we're at a teaching, but especially at a teaching. So the text we're studying, right, is Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara, which is how to, live the life of a bodhisattva, which is to say how to manifest the six perfections in such a way that they develop, protect, and increase our bodhicitta, which then propels us towards Buddhahood, right? But when we think about this, what this all is this is the teaching of the Buddha, right? We say the Buddha Dharma. What do we mean by Dharma? When we just say we have the Dharma jewel, but then we have Dharma in general, and then we have Buddha Dharma, we use this term over and over and over again. Part of the reason we use the term, especially the Sanskrit term, is because it has so many meanings. It's much easier to use that term than to try to give specifics. The way they etymologize the Sanskrit is it comes from the verbal root dur, which means to carry. So dharma is something that is carried, right? Something that is held. So to one extent, you can say in general, a dharma is just a belief or a thought or an idea. But another extent, the word dharma means anything. Anything that exists is a dharma, right? So the word, especially clear in Tibetan, the word for dharma is Choe. So all phenomena, any phenomena that exists is a Choe, is a dharma, right? So the word is very vague. It can literally mean anything. But when we say we're studying the dharma, that's not what we mean, right? When we say we're studying the dharma, what we mean is we're studying the Buddha Dharma, which is the teachings of the Buddha. But the teachings of the Buddha, he didn't invent the Dharma. He recognized the nature of reality. He recognized what it means to be a samsaric being and what it means to be free from samsara and what energy and effort it takes to free ourselves from samsara. And he organized those thoughts in such a way that they can be understood by ordinary suffering beings such as ourselves. So he explained the Dharma to us. He didn't invent it, right? The Buddha Dharma is his uncommon way of understanding the truth about samsara and about Buddhahood, and then presenting it in such a way that we can actually absorb it and find it meaningful. Right? So, in that regard, the Dharma or the Dharma jewel or the Buddha Dharma is not something invented by Shakyamuni Buddha or any of the other Buddhas, but something that is distilled by them so that it can be useful to our lives. And so when we understand that, we say, okay, well, then what is the point of the Buddha Dharma in that regard? What is the key essence of the Buddha Dharma? And the key essence is the purpose of it is to transform our minds. That's the purpose of the Dharma, to transform our minds from the suffering minds of samsaric beings to the minds of Buddhas, slowly but surely, right? Minds that are free from all suffering, free from all stains, free from all afflictions, as well as their seeds and their imprints. So the Buddha Dharma is meant to transform. And if we're not transforming our mind, then when we study the Dharma, if we're not actively using that as a way to transform, all we're doing is accumulating knowledge. So you can understand the meaning of all the scriptures. You can have memorized every single prayer, every single scripture, every single tantra, even. But if it's not affecting your mind in any way, if you're not allowing those teachings to transform you, then it's just worldly knowledge. Okay? It may be the words of the scriptures, but if they're not doing anything, they're just worldly knowledge. The Dharma is meant to transform us, right? And that doesn't happen overnight, of course. It's a slow process. Now, sometimes, especially when we're new to Dharma, we might hear some sort of pithy Dharma insight and it lights something up in our brain. Like that happens, right? And so sometimes we have those moments, those brief moments where you're like, oh my goodness, everything makes sense, at least for that brief moment. So those do happen. But we can't rely on those because those aren't stable. Those aren't consistent, right? Especially when we're new, since everything is so foreign to us, then they happen once in a while because we're experiencing something new and exciting. But eventually, we have to put our nose to the grindstone, as they say, and it's going to happen slowly. You know, especially for those of us that are trying to engage with the more difficult philosophical ideas. You can say the words explaining emptiness over and over and over again and not really understand them, but you try to, and all of a sudden one day you say, wait a second, I think that actually kind of makes sense. Like I see how that's affecting my life. I see how that's doing something in my everyday life. So most of our realizations, they don't come, like buckets of cold water over the head. We build them up slowly and we only realize afterwards that we figured them out. Okay. So it's nice when we have those really amazing insights, but those aren't stable. We can't rely on them. Dharma is about transforming our mind slowly, right? It's about recognizing that the path to Buddhahood is a long one and that we're committed to it. Now, if we want to transform our mind, then obviously we need to understand the mind. We need to understand what's going on, what is causing all these obstacles. How is the mind both our source of liberation and our source of suffering, right? What is going on in the mind that is doing this? So there are many ways, right, to study the mind, but through studying the mind, that is how we integrate our everyday life with the teachings, right? Which is to say, we need to engage in meditation. That's the important thing. Or at least that's one of the main rules of meditation. We could think of meditation, being important at the beginning because it helps calm our mind and it helps prepare our mind. It helps make our mind receptive. And we can think of meditation as important in the middle because it is actually the work that integrates the teachings and our experience, right? It transforms our mind, it transforms our intellectual understanding to experiential understanding. And then it's important in the end because it then assesses the teachings and it assesses if we're applying them appropriately. So by preparing our mind, by preparing ourselves to receive the teachings, by then actually integrating those teachings and transforming our mind, and then analyzing if we're actually living in accordance with those teachings now that we have tried to integrate them, that meditation practice is useful at all three times. And the reason this is especially, useful to think about today is because as we continue in this text, today we are starting chapter 5, which is guarding alertness or introspection. Now, really, chapter 5 is really about ethical discipline, right? So we've already discussed in the past how the Bodhicharyavatara is laid out. The first 3 verses are about how to develop bodhicitta. And then the next 3, not verses, excuse me, chapters. The first 3 chapters about how to develop bodhicitta. The next 3 chapters about how to prevent your bodhicitta from declining. And then the final 3 chapters, not counting the dedication at the end, the final 3 chapters, 7, 8, and 9, are about how to increase your bodhicitta. Okay. Within those 9 chapters, we're also teaching the 6 perfections, the 6 perfected activities that are adopted by bodhisattvas and Buddhas. And so those obviously are generosity and morality or ethical discipline, and then patience, joyful effort, concentration, and wisdom. So the generosity is taught, or the perfection of generosity is taught in chapters 2 and 3, especially in the teaching of the 7-limb prayer. We talk about the 7 limbs. There's prostration and then offering and then confession and then rejoicing, requesting, beseeching, dedicating. Those are the 7 limbs of a complete practice. And so that second one, making offering, at that point, generosity is explicitly taught in chapters 2 and 3. Chapters 4 and 5 are what teach us morality or ethical discipline. So we just finished chapter 4 2 weeks ago, and that is on conscientiousness. So conscientiousness is being aware of our surroundings and of how our mind is reacting to our surroundings at all times. And being aware that if our mind is not pursuing virtue, then what it's doing is in contradiction to the Dharma. So conscientiousness is just recognizing what our mind is actually doing and recognizing what situation we're in, right? So it's a situational awareness as well as an internal awareness. And we can see how that leads to supporting ethical discipline, because if you're not aware of your behavior and you're not aware of how your behavior can be destructive, then of course you're not going to be able to support ethical discipline, right? If you don't have an understanding that this is virtuous and this is non-virtuous, and you don't have an understanding that your behavior is causing harm, then you're not going to go about preventing that harmful behavior. So that's what we mean by conscientiousness. Now here we're talking about awareness or introspection. So this is a little different. Introspection is actually watching our mind and seeing how our mind is adapting to the object of meditation as well as to any disturbances, right? We usually talk about introspection in the context of generating a mind of calm abiding. And that comes up a little bit later in this chapter. But introspection is what is watching to see if we are actually getting lost. It's that part of our mind that's always active, that is watching itself. And so here, introspection helps guard our morality because we have to recognize that all of our morality, ethical discipline, these are all the same thing, right? In Tibetan, it's called Sultram. An excellent mind will degenerate due to having distorted views, right? So if the mind is seeking out distorted views, perverted views, non-Buddhist ideas, then no matter what success that mind has, no matter how much clarity that mind has, it's going to degenerate, right? So we have to have a part of our mind that is watching ourselves, because ultimately all of our actions come from our minds. We say there's actions of body, speech, and mind, but of those 3, the actions of mind are the most important. And the reason for that is all of our actions of body, all of our actions of speech follow after an action of mind. We say we have an intention, and in fact, all of our actions have, we say, two intentions. There's the causal intention, and then there is the simultaneous intention, which isn't a real good way to use the word intention, but that's how we translate it. So the causal intention is the thought to go about doing something, and then the simultaneous intention is the mind that happens while we're doing that thing, right? Which is why, as ordinary suffering beings, we say that all of our actions are pervaded by ignorance, by self-grasping, because even if self-grasping isn't the causal intention, so as long as we haven't developed a realization of emptiness that would uproot our self-grasping mind, then self-grasping is still going to be a simultaneous intention that accompanies all of our activities, right? Self-grasping itself, mind you, isn't always non-virtuous. It can be neutral. Even our virtuous activities are stained by self-grasping, as long as we are ordinary beings who don't have an understanding of emptiness. So self-grasping itself isn't always non-virtuous, but as long as we haven't uprooted it, then it is affecting all of our activities. So because of this, our mental activities rather, are the most powerful. And so if we want to protect our ethical discipline, we talk about ethical discipline as actions of body, speech, and mind, but the way to protect all of our actions of body and speech is to protect our actions of mind. To understand what it means to guard our mind, to subdue our mind. By subduing the mind, that is how we protect ourselves from engaging in non-virtuous behavior. Remember,
Venerable,
yeah.
Could you go over causal intention and simultaneous intention once more, please? I didn't think I followed it.
So a causal intention, the Gyui Kunal, is simply the mind that, the mind that causes or inspires you to take an action, right? So it might be the anger that causes you to lash out in violence before you slap someone or hit someone. So that mind of anger would be the causal intention, right? And then the simultaneous intention, it can also be anger, like that can also be there, but it is whatever mind is accompanying the actual action itself. So many times, for instance, if someone insults you and you slap them right away, your causal intention and your simultaneous intention are going to be more or less happening one after another, like immediately in quick succession, right? So it's not like there's a big gap of time between them, and it can be the same mind. It can be the same anger that was the causal intention, carries through and serves as the simultaneous intention as well. That's possible, right? But what's worth noting as the reason we say that all of our actions are pervaded by ignorance, and ignorance itself is the root of samsara that's causing us to perpetually cycle until we actually understand emptiness that allows us to uproot ignorance entirely, is because as ordinary sentient beings who don't have any understanding of the nature of reality, all of our actions are going to have a simultaneous intention of ignorance. Right? So that's the most important reason for recognizing those two things. And also, and this comes up, I think this comes up later, there's debate about how powerful one intention is versus another. So, if you engage in a harmful action, but you do it with a virtuous intention and your causal intention is virtuous, then even if the simultaneous intention is not virtuous, can that harmful action be virtuous or not? And there's debate about it. I know it comes up later in this text, not in this chapter though. But so the example that's always given, right, is in one of his past lives, the Buddha was on a merchant ship and there were 500 merchants. And a pirate came and he was going to kill all 500 of the merchants on the ship. And out of his pure compassion, the Buddha killed the pirate, right? But he killed the pirate out of his compassion, not because he had compassion for the 500 merchants who were going to be killed. He did, but that wasn't his causal intention. His causal intention was realizing by the pirate, through the act of killing, would cause such incredible negative karma that he would be reborn in hell realms for countless lifetimes. And in developing compassion with regard to that, that's the reason he engaged in this harmful action, right? And so that action would not be purely negative, even though we say if we look at the 10 non-virtuous actions and the 3 non-virtuous actions of body, the heaviest one is killing, right? Especially killing a human being. So the act itself was non-virtuous, but the causal motivation was not non-virtuous. Now, this is where different teachers, there's debate. You know, not everything is black and white. So some teachers say so it was a virtuous action, even though the action itself was non-virtuous. Since the causal motivation was virtuous, it was a virtuous action. Other teachers say, and this is what Pabonka says quite clearly, is that it's a mixed action, but even though the causal motivation or intention was virtuous, you still have to experience negative consequences. And so, for instance, as a negative consequence of that act of killing, the Buddha was reborn in a hell realm. But since his causal motivation was virtuous and so powerful, he was only born in a hell realm for a very brief moment. He was born in a hell realm for a brief moment, and then he immediately, that hell being died, and was reborn in the upper realm, right? So exactly the relationship between the heaviness of the action and the causal motivation is not agreed upon by every single teacher, right? But that is where we understand that causal motivation and simultaneous motivation or intention can be different, and they can mediate the weight of the karma that we accumulate as a result of our actions.
So, Venerable, just to understand, could it be like once you said that, like, let's say you give a gift to someone, the causal, but you do it, expecting something in return. So here, in this case, the causal and simultaneous intentions are both non-virtuous, right? Though the action of giving a gift is maybe a virtuous action, but
yeah. So if your mind right from the beginning is expecting something in return, then it won't be virtuous. It may not be non-virtuous. It may be neutral. It really depends, right? There could be levels of it. But if the intention right from the beginning is, I'm going to give this thing with the expectation that they're going to owe me something in response, or they're going to be happy with me and give me adulation and praise, or whatever it may be. If that is the intention from the beginning, then the whole action is not going to be a virtuous action. It's most likely non-virtuous, and maybe it's neutral. It would have to depend on what your real motivation was, right?
okay.
But that's an example, yeah.
Okay.
Even though they receive benefit, right? Even though they receive worldly benefit from whatever it is you gave them, then from their side there may be benefit, but from your side there is not. So we just have to remember that as we guard the mind and as we practice morality and ethical discipline, in order to guard the mind, protect the mind, the reason we have to put effort into it is because our worldly habits are really difficult to break, are really, really difficult to break. It takes so much effort to break our worldly habits. And so to train in bodhicitta, of course, we need to have really strong ethical discipline that protects our mind and prevents our mind from degenerating. This means we have to have an unmistaken method, which is to say, we have to use all 6 perfections in our practice. We have to have bodhicitta and wisdom both, right? To only engage in practices that are aligned with merit, which is to say, bodhicitta and so on, and to ignore the practices that are aligned with wisdom, then you're only going to get partway there. And in the same way, if you're only focused on these philosophical ideas and practicing or trying to understand emptiness, but you're not engaging in the other practices that accumulate merit, the other practices that are related to compassion and bodhicitta and the other perfections, then you're not going to get there. Both of those are partial. They're incomplete practices that will not lead us to Buddhahood. So, and if we want to kind of break the stranglehold of our worldly habits, if we want to actually progress on the path towards Buddhahood, if we want to allow the Dharma to transform our minds in a meaningful way, one of the first things we have to do is guard our minds, right? We have to guard our minds and protect our minds and recognize that all of our negative actions come from our minds. All of our suffering comes from our minds. And in the same way, all of our liberation comes from our minds. All of our happiness comes from our minds, right? It's not like we're destined for failure all the time. We have the capacity to succeed or fail based on our own actions, right? So we have to recognize that, and recognizing how powerful the mind is, then we exert effort to guard it, to protect it. And we develop ethical discipline in order to do that. In general, ethical discipline, there's ethical discipline, and then there's perfection of ethical discipline. And the difference between those, and then sometimes people make another category called the practice of the perfection of ethical discipline. This is true for all 6 perfections. To be an actual perfection, right? The perfection of ethical discipline only exists in the continuum of either a bodhisattva or a Buddha, right? Ethical discipline that is motivated by bodhicitta, actual bodhicitta, that is the perfection of ethical discipline. So that only exists in the continuum of a bodhisattva or a Buddha. Ethical discipline itself can exist on any category, right? So even the Hinayana practitioners and even non-Buddhist practitioners can have some sort of ethical discipline, right? And then, so those are the 2 broad categories. And then some people like to make a category in the middle that says the practice of the perfection of ethical discipline, which is to say those of us who are not yet on the bodhisattva path, who haven't entered into the Mahayana path, but we are striving to, and we are trying to generate bodhicitta and allowing whatever feeble attempts at bodhicitta we have to be the motivating factor for our ethical discipline. Then we don't actually have the perfection of ethical discipline, but it is similar to the perfection of ethical discipline. So it is sometimes called the practice of the perfection of ethical discipline. So this is just recognizing that there are many permutations, and the most important distinction is the motivation, right? So if actual bodhicitta is motivating it, that's what makes it a perfected activity. If it's our facsimile of bodhicitta that's motivating it, then it's the practice of that perfection, but not the actual perfection. So in this text, and that's true for all 6 perfections, right? Not just ethical discipline. The difference between the generosity and the perfection of generosity and the performance of the perfection of generosity, right? It's true for all 6, that distinction. So in the Bodhicharyavatara, they're specifically talking about the actual perfections. So the way these would exist in the continuum of a bodhisattva or a Buddha, right? And so this is what we strive for, but we may not have actually realized it completely yet. So in terms of ethical discipline, in general, we'd say ethical discipline is abandoning harmful actions towards others, as well as abandoning all of the bases for that harm, right? That's the general definition of ethical discipline. And in a Mahayana context, not only is it abandoning all harm towards others and the basis for that harm, but it is also abandoning the mind that is seeking out liberation for oneself alone, which includes the self-cherishing mind. Now, it's true that a Shravaka Arhat has abandoned the self-cherishing mind, right? Because they have abandoned all of their afflicted minds. But even though they have their ethical discipline that abandons the self-cherishing mind, is not a Mahayana ethical discipline because it is still focused on their own liberation alone, right? So the perfection of ethical discipline is abandoning the mind that wishes to harm any sentient being, as well as all the basis or the modalities of harm that come along with that, as well as abandoning the mind that's seeking out liberation for oneself alone, which is most actively manifest in our lives through the self-cherishing mind. Now, when we talk about the perfections and ethical discipline, we often recognize 3 different types of ethical discipline, and all of them come down to protecting our mind, right? All of them are ways to transform our mind and protect it from non-virtue, but there are slight differences. The main one, the one we think of that we associate most readily with ethical discipline, is called the ethical discipline of restraint. And what this means is our vows. So the pratimoksha vows, as well as the bodhisattva vows, and the abandonment of the 10 non-virtuous actions that are in accordance
Venerable,
with. Excuse me? Yeah. Is that a question? Oh, okay. I guess not.
Venerable.
Yes.
Hi, hello, Venerable. Good morning. Sorry, I've not been keeping in touch with the community for quite a long time. I'm sorry.
No problem.
And one of the core teachings of of Buddhism, as we know, is attachment. So Buddhism teaches us that if we want liberation, we need to let go of attachment. Now you say that attachment for one's liberation is not, very good for people who are following Buddhism or Buddhahood. But when we seek liberation for others, when we are thinking of overall good, is that not also a nature of attachment that we attach to overall good for everyone?
So when we talk about attachment and desire that we need to abandon, there's different types of desire, right? And so I desire to become a Buddha in order to liberate all beings. That is a type of desire, but the mental factor is a mental factor of desire, but it's not negative, it's virtuous. So the attachment that we are giving up, the actual uh, afflicted desire, is that mind that seeks out pleasant objects and that it superimposes pleasant qualities on external objects and then grasps onto them and clings to them tightly and then defines those as a type of happiness, right? So it is that attraction in that way. That's what we mean when we're saying we are getting rid of attachment, we're getting rid of clinging, we're getting rid of the superimposition of pleasant or beautiful qualities on external phenomena and then grasping to that as if it was real, right? That's what we mean by attachment. And that's what we mean by desire. So lustful desire, sexual desire, those things come about due to the afflictions, right? But desire itself or attachment itself, there are other permutations of it that aren't non-virtuous, such as the desire to help others, the desire to be of benefit, the desire to study, the desire to improve your mind, the desire to become a Buddha. So there are types of desire that are not always negative. And so the words desire and attachment in English, in Tibetan, a lot of the words overlap, right? And so sometimes you can translate a word as desire or attachment. So sometimes when you're translating into other languages, we try to be careful. So we always try to keep attachment itself as in general, most translators try to use the word attachment only to recognize as one of those three poisons, right? One of the root afflictions. But desire is not necessarily that, even though in Tibetan, they come from similar words for that reason, because there are, desiring one's own liberation and working towards one's own liberation is a Buddhist activity, right? When we look at the different types of Buddhist motivations, the Buddhist motivation to achieve a better human rebirth or a better rebirth, that is the kind of small scope of motivations, but it is Buddhist spiritual motivation. And then the motivation to achieve your own liberation and freedom from samsara, freedom from all suffering for yourself, that is also a Buddhist motivation. It's the Buddhist motivation of a medium scope being. But as people that are engaging in Mahayana practice, we're looking for the greatest motivation. And it's called greatest not due to a qualitative nature of being better or worse, but because it includes within its scope all sentient beings. So the motivation is to free all sentient beings from suffering. And we recognize that the only way to do that or to move towards that is to become Buddhas ourselves. So that the desire to be free from suffering for oneself alone is not negative. And it is, in fact, a proper Buddhist motivation. It's not a Mahayana Buddhist motivation. So here, when we're talking about ethical discipline and the perfection of ethical discipline, then that perfection of ethical discipline has to have the abandoning the mind that wishes only for one's own liberation, right? That's the reason it has to abandon that, because it's a Mahayana, it's a perfection of ethical discipline, not just mere ethical discipline. And so when we
Thank you
talk about the
so
ethical,
much.
no, of course, no problem. And so when we talk about the first of the three types of ethical discipline, the ethical discipline of restraint, it can either just be abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions and by abandoning those, you're in accordance with the pratimoksha vows. Even if you don't have pratimoksha vows in your continuum, your action of abandoning non-virtue is in accordance with the pratimoksha vows. And then there's the actual pratimoksha vows. So there are 7 categories of pratimoksha vows generally, really 8, but for the purposes of being a basis for Mahayana, for Bodhisattva vows, we only include 7. And those are the male and female householder vows, the male and female novice vows, the intermediate nun vows, and the fully ordained monk and nun vows. Those 7 are the 7 types of pratimoksha vows. There's an 8th type, which is the one-day vows, right? Which if anyone has ever taken Mahayana precepts are very similar to the one-day vows, though the motivation is different, and the Mahayana precept ceremony actually comes from a tantric tradition, but the idea is the same, that you're taking these vows for a single day. Those aren't considered a valid basis for Bodhisattva vows because they don't exist in your continuum for more than a day, so they're not very powerful. So the ethical discipline of restraint is either is the abandonment of non-virtuous action, especially by adopting and protecting your vows, which is to say your pratimoksha vows and your bodhisattva vows. The bodhisattva vows themselves, in general, being based on or dependent on your pratimoksha vows. Not a requirement, but in general, that's how they go, right? So that's the most common one. When we think of ethical discipline, that's what we're thinking of. That is the most common. If someone says, what does it mean to have morality? You think of abandoning harmful activities, right? So that makes sense in a worldly sense and also a spiritual sense. And that's why that's the real heart of ethical discipline. But there are two other types of ethical discipline, and it's worth at least thinking about them. Especially since these two chapters are all dedicated, the chapter on conscientiousness and the chapter on alertness or guarding alertness or introspection are all dedicated to our practice of the perfection of ethical discipline. It's good to know all three types, right? So the second type is what's called the ethical discipline of gathering virtuous dharmas. And the way that's defined by Asanga and his Bodhisattva ground, one of the best places to study the practices of a Bodhisattva and the Bodhisattva vows is Tsongkhapa's text, which is called Janchup Shunglom, like the main path to enlightenment, or the highway to enlightenment, I suppose you could say. And that itself is a commentary on. So Asanga wrote a text called the Bodhisattva Grounds. And the 10th chapter of the Bodhisattva Grounds is all about morality. It's the chapter on morality. So Tsongkhapa's commentary on the 10th chapter of Asanga's Bodhisattva Grounds is where Tsongkhapa discusses the Bodhisattva vows in most detail, right? And in that text, he quotes Asanga when he's defining these three types of morality, and the definition he gives for the ethical discipline or morality. I use those two terms interchangeably, so I'm sorry if I flip back and forth. The definition he gives of the ethical discipline of gathering virtuous dharma is whatever virtuous actions are accumulated by a bodhisattva for the purpose of enlightenment after having properly adopted the bodhisattva vows. Yeah. So it's essentially any virtuous activity that a bodhisattva does with enlightenment being the motivation after they've taken up their bodhisattva vows. So we obviously don't have, since we're not on the Mahayana path yet, we don't have actual perfection and morality, but we have the practice of it. So if we've taken bodhisattva vows, or at least generated a mind that is in accordance with the bodhisattva vows, then any of our virtuous actions that are done with the motivation of achieving Buddhahood then become included in this practice of the perfection of morality of gathering virtuous dharma, right? He actually gives a number of different elaborations on that. If you want to break it down, it really is any virtuous action, but he gives a list of different 8 activities that kind of embody it. The first one is generating the 3 wisdoms. So the wisdoms of hearing, the wisdom or study rather, the wisdom of study, the wisdom of contemplation, and the wisdom of meditation. Right. So through our acts of study, contemplation, and meditation, we generate wisdom that realizes those. Those generation of wisdoms are a type of gathering virtuous dharma. The next one is called gathering merit or virtue with regard to special basis, and the special basis being your parents or your gurus or the sick. So when you show respect and help your parents, when you have respect and veneration and devotion and proper devotion to a guru, and when you give aid to the sick, that's another type of gathering virtuous dharma that is included. So remember, by doing these things, you're actually practicing morality. That's the important thing to remember here. And the third one they give is having joy in all of the excellent qualities that exist and in all those beings that are endowed with good qualities, right? So to some extent, that's the act of rejoicing. But seeing other beings who embody all the qualities that we aspire to and feeling joy at that. And then the next is relying on patience, right? And so you see how the 6 perfections work within one another. By relying on patience, we're engaging in a virtuous activity. And so as long as we are relying on patience with the motivation to achieve Buddhahood, then that becomes the virtuous activity of gathering virtuous dharma of ethical discipline, right? In addition to relying on patience, is the practice of making dedications and aspirational prayers. So engaging in aspirational prayers and making dedications is also a type of morality. Making offerings to the 3 jewels is a type of gathering virtuous dharma. Relying on conscientiousness, right? So allowing yourself to not just be indifferent, making sure that you're aware of your surroundings and how you exist within them, and then acting intentionally. And then the last one, that's the 7th one. The last one is called the virtue that abides on the path of being content with what you've already accumulated. And what that means is being content with whatever it is you have and not chasing after beautiful objects or running away from undesirable objects due to your own unrestrained mind, but being content with whatever it is you have and not seeking out something else or throwing away something because it displeases you, right? So being content with whatever you've already accumulated. But I list those out just because it's useful to know, and it's a good list. It comes directly from a sangha. So if you really want to see the breadth of gathering virtuous dharma as it relates to the morality or the practice of morality, those are all listed. But truthfully, any virtuous activity you do that is done with the intention to achieve Buddhahood, that is going to be included in this. And then the last type of ethical discipline is the ethical discipline of working for the benefit of other sentient beings. And there are many different versions of this as well. But you can see how this is just not only being virtuous or engaging in virtue, collecting virtuous dharma, but then actively working to benefit others and doing so with the mind to achieve Buddhahood, as well as the immediate benefit. That itself is a type of morality. So these 3 types of morality are important to understand. Of course, our practice, the heart of the practice of morality is going to be the morality of restraint, but we shouldn't neglect or forget the other 2 as well. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, Venerable. I just have one more question. Like, again, if we continue on this question of grasping or, attachment, if you compare to last year, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Like, compared to last year, when I was in Bangalore, I was working in Bangalore. Now the situation has changed. Now I've come, after November 2025 onwards, I've been working from my hometown, Bombay. So the thing is that now it's a new job and people are new, culture is new. So, I've been on probation, like you have to serve 6 months probation when you join an organization initially. So 4 months have been completed. And my bosses say that she is not really not satisfied, because of the work issues and all that, maybe communication issues, which can be quite understandable because obviously the work is new, the work culture, people are new. So again, she has given me some points to work on it. She's like quite understanding in nature, my boss. I'm working on those points, but again, my mind keeps flowing in the future. Like, what if I'm working on those points, but still she's not satisfied? What if again people come to her and complain to her, about my communication issues
Yeah. So
while I'm working on those? So my mind is like a grasping mind. It keeps on floating into the future, like what would happen.
yeah, I understand. So this is a little bit tangential. So I'll answer a little bit, but these kind of questions we can maybe save for the end, because it's not quite with what we're talking
Okay.
about. But in general, right? Whether you're engaging in worldly activity or spiritual activity, you want to set your motivation and say, why am I doing this, right? This is what we're saying here is we have to guard our mind. By guarding our mind, it means watching our motivation. So am I engaging in this activity simply because I want to impress others, simply because I want to be considered good at my job or a good practitioner? Am I doing this for external validation, or am I doing this for an actual valid reason? Right. So no matter what the physical activity is or the external activity is, if the motivation is seeking some sort of external approval, then all you're doing is feeding your self-cherishing mind. So you're creating more experiences of suffering for yourself, right? So worrying about those things takes away from the actual activity of doing the job as best you can, whether it be a worldly job, such as your employment, or whether it be engaging in a spiritual practice, right? So when we talk about so to bring this into this topic specifically, when we're trying to guard our mind, we want to make sure all of our actions are virtuous and that are pointed towards Buddhahood. That includes our worldly actions. That includes having to live in the world and go to work, take care of your family, go to school, have a job, any of these things. These are worldly actions, but we do them with spiritual motivation. So we guard our mind away from being motivated by desire for wealth, desire for fame, desire for popularity. We guide our mind away from, or we protect it from being motivated by fear of being criticized or fear of not being understood correctly, fear of losing out, right? Those things are only worldly motivations. So they're not going to allow our practice to ever propel us to be free from suffering. All those motivations will do is continue our suffering more and more. So when we try to practice this ethical discipline of guarding our mind, and specifically of using conscientiousness and alertness to guard our mind, the purpose of that is to prevent our future suffering, right? So that is how we can think of those things.
Thank you so much, Venerable.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, with that in mind, ethical discipline in this regard, if we think of guarding our mind as being the heart of ethical discipline, then that is the basis for all of our success, both our spiritual success and our worldly success. Ethical discipline really is the foundation upon which any success we may have is going to be built. So we can't compromise on it. Okay. We say that one of the primary causes to have a perfect human rebirth is stainless ethical discipline, right? Or having perfect ethical discipline, perfect morality. So you can see that in that way, both in this life and in future lives, having as pure morality as we can, guarding our mind as powerfully as we can, that is what is going to set us up to succeed. And that's true for our worldly goals as well as our spiritual goals. And that's true for our immediate experiences in this life as well as our future goals. So with that in mind, I want us to think a little bit about how conscientiousness and introspection both feed into morality, right? So if morality is restraining from non-virtue, the way conscientiousness, what we talked about in chapter 4, plays with morality or informs morality is because if we're not actually aware of our actions, or we're not aware of our situation, and we're not aware of how we're motivated, what motivations we have, then we're going to easily pursue non-virtue without realizing it, right? And in fact, when you look at a lot of the vows of, for instance, the monastic vows, each one of the vows, and when you're studying them, it says what is the motivation necessary that would cause you to break this vow, okay? Or that caused you to engage in a harmful action. And many of them are just non-conscientiousness. That's the motivation. A lack of conscientiousness is what can cause you to break the vow. So having conscientiousness is just being aware of yourself and your surroundings and how you're engaging with them in a meaningful way. So if you want to practice morality, you have to have that awareness. And then introspection is then taking that conscientiousness, that awareness, the language is difficult, having that conscientiousness and then turning it up to be more powerful, to actually then looking at your actions and seeing how your actions are being affected by whatever distractions, whatever obstacles, whatever else is going on. So there's just merely being aware of your surroundings and then being aware of how you react to those surroundings, right? Those are the two different aspects. And so now we will start with chapter 5, and in doing so, we will be able to study a little bit about guarding alertness or introspection. Now, I will say, oh, sorry, there's someone entered my courtyard and my puppy is growling. Okay. Oh, there we go. Hold on one second. Sorry. Give me 1 second. Sorry, folks.
Please stay online. Venerable will join. If you want to stretch your legs or get a drink of water, this would be the right.
Sorry, folks. World gets in the way sometimes. This is the joy of teaching online, is that I have puppies that are very committed to protecting me, but they protect me from houseboys, they protect me from my friends, they protect me from my teacher. Anyone that comes near my room, they protect me from. It's very kind of them. Also very loud and very frustrating. Sorry about that. So, are you okay? This is Bartu. He's very excitable. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Well, as soon as I turn the microphone on, he barks. Just apologize. Okay. Let's practice patience with regard to the barking dog and see if we can continue. It's too. Is it a distraction? I can't tell how loud it is on the microphone. If it's a distraction, I'm gonna have to try to.
We can actually hear the barking, Venerable.
You can't hear him.
Doesn't carry. No, it's removed. The noise is
Oh,
removed.
okay.
Yeah, we can't. I mean, I can't hear him at all.
Oh,
Till you till you mentioned,
okay.
I didn't even know that there was a distraction.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a gate on my microphone to try to prevent external noises. I didn't think it was that effective. Okay, so then I will just navigate the barking, and if it's not disturbing you, then that's fine. That's something I can do. Sorry, I apologize. This is sometimes what happens when we are dealing with online teachings. So we're going to begin here, chapter 5, guarding alertness. I have to say, this is a wonderful, wonderful chapter. I mean, the whole text is phenomenal, but a lot of the quotes that people will say from the Bodhisattva are going to come from this chapter. So if you've heard quotes here and there, very likely that you'll recognize some of them from here, from this chapter. And there are some verses in this chapter that are very useful to just pull out and have, or let them be the basis for a meditation practice, right? So if any of these verses are inspiring to you, which many of them might be, it's good to take them and to use them as a practice to meditate on and to use them as a prompt upon which you can then do some reflection, right? Some inner work. So if we look at the first verse here, those who wish to guard their practice should very attentively guard their minds. For those who do not guard their minds will be unable to guard their practice. Right? So as we've been saying, all of our actions come from the mind, and therefore all of our practice, whatever spiritual engagement that we hope to do, it's going to come from our mind. And even if it's a practice of prostrations or offering prayers, those are going to be physical and vocal activities, but they still are motivated by the mind. And so if we don't guard the mind, then those practices are not going to be spiritual practices, or they have the chance of degenerating. Right? That also means that we should make sure that we're always focusing on virtuous objects. Right? And what that means is when we're meditating, it's very easy to meditate on non-virtuous objects, without even meaning to. How often, if you're driving on the road and someone cuts you off and you say, that jerk, how long do you think about them? And that anger, do you just sit and ruminate on that anger over and over and over again? For how long? That's meditating on anger. That's allowing your mind to focus on and become familiar with that mind of anger, right? So you're not sitting down on a cushion and meditating on anger, but you're allowing yourself to focus on it. You're allowing that to be the object of all of your attention, and you are becoming familiar with it. That's what it means to meditate on something. So it's very easy to meditate on non-virtuous objects. We do it all the time. So part of guarding our mind is making sure that our minds are always focused on virtuous objects. Okay? And what that means is we need to have some level of wisdom, which is to say we have to study, so we understand what are appropriate things to abandon and what are appropriate things to adopt. So we have to understand that these activities, these objects, this behavior is going to lead me closer to Buddhahood, and this behavior, this attitude is going to harm me, either in the immediate or in the long-term goal. So we have to know what to adopt and what to abandon. But the only way we can know those things is if we study. And we use our practice of study to increase our conventional wisdom, right? So it's not just the wisdom, the ultimate wisdom, realizing emptiness. We need conventional wisdom as well that allows us to understand what are the appropriate parts of the path as we need to engage in them. And by understanding those, then we can understand what are appropriate objects for our mind to focus on. So at any time, whether it's actively in meditation or intentional meditation, or whether we're going about our everyday life, we should always check and say, is my mind focused on a virtuous object, or is it focused on a non-virtuous object, right? Am I looking at that thing that should be abandoned and holding onto it with both hands, or not, right? So protecting our mind, protecting our practice, making sure our practice is most efficacious means we need to protect the mind that motivates that practice. So that is, to some extent, that is it's the first verse in this chapter, because it's kind of setting out the guidelines for what this whole chapter is going to be, right? Then the next verse, in this world, unsubdued and crazed elephants are incapable of causing such harms as the miseries of the deepest hell, which can be caused by the unleashed elephant of the mind. So often, right, the mind that's untamed is compared to a wild elephant or a crazed elephant, or an elephant that has eaten fermented fruit and gotten drunk. Okay? And here, this is recognizing we have to develop conviction that there are two things. One, or I guess the main thing, is we have to develop the conviction that no matter what suffering we may experience in this life, it is nothing compared to the suffering of the lower realms, right? Being reborn as an animal, a hungry ghost, or a hell being. Those three, the suffering of those lower realms is so extensive. And not only that, but it is so long. And when you're reborn in one of those realms, not only is it, especially the Preta realm and the hell realm, the lifespan of those beings is quite long. Not only that, but when you're reborn in one of the lower realms, it's very difficult to accumulate virtue. And so you create the causes to be continually reborn in those realms quite often, right? So it's like a negative feedback loop. So we have to have conviction that no matter what suffering we may experience in this life, whatever gross, most difficult suffering, whether it be suffering like emotional torment, or whether it be the loss of our life, or everything in between, none of that compares to the suffering of the lower realms. We have to actually develop a strong conviction in this and recognize it. Because then when we have that conviction, then we can say, okay, what is the cause for my experiences of suffering in this life? And what is the cause for my experiencing suffering in the lower realms? And we recognize that any external factor that may cause me suffering in this life, especially physical suffering, that's the point of this verse, such as a crazed elephant, such as any external enemy, quote unquote, that could cause harm to my body, or it could cause harm to my mind by, engaging in harmful actions towards me, would cause me to generate negative minds. Any enemy such as that, or any external force, they can only cause me the suffering of this life. That's all it can do. But the suffering in the lower realms, that comes from my mind. It's my mind that creates the non-virtue or the non-virtuous motivation that then causes me to engage in non-virtuous behavior that plants the karmic seed that ripens into my rebirth into a lower realm. It is only my mind that can do that. No matter how much someone despises me, they can't cause me to be reborn in a lower realm. Only I can do that. Right? So that's why we say the unleashed elephant of my mind is far more destructive, or has rather far more destructive capacity than an actual wild elephant that might be staring me down. The worst a wild elephant can do is kill me, but my mind can cause me to be reborn in the deplorable states of existence for eons, right? And if we don't have conviction that the suffering of the lower realms is so much worse than any suffering we may experience as a human right now, given our current circumstances and environment and privileges, then that won't mean anything to us. So we have to have conviction in the suffering of the lower realms. We have to have conviction that the only thing that can cause us to be reborn in the lower realms is our own actions, the karma we accumulate due to our own minds. Right? And that is what allows us to recognize that other beings may harm us, right? That's not denying that we can experience harm and grief and disruption from worldly beings, but it's saying that harm doesn't hold a flame, a candle flame, to the brilliant sun of our own capacity for self-harm. Right? And so then if we recognize that and we say, okay, well, if my mind is what has the potential to cause me the greatest suffering, right? What do I do about that? If it's my mind that can cause me to be reborn in the lower realms and is more dangerous to me than any external enemy, what do I do? And so he continues and he says, if the elephant of my mind is firmly bound on all sides by the rope of mindfulness, then all fears will cease to exist and all virtues will come into my hand. Right? So this is an analogy we often see when we are studying how to achieve single-pointed concentration, right? How to achieve calm abiding, which is that we need to restrain our mind using the rope. If our mind is a wild elephant, we need to restrain it and train it using the rope of mindfulness and the hook of introspection or awareness. These two things go together. So mindfulness, right, is remembering the object that we're focused on. Right? That's what it means to be mindful. Mindfulness is especially in the Indian and Tibetan traditions. Mindfulness is a type of mind that is always remembering whatever object we're actually focused on, not being distracted. And introspection or awareness is so that we consider it a rope. So if you're trying to tame a wild elephant, then the object you're meditating on is like a stake or a pole that you put up in the center of the courtyard, and then you tie the elephant to it with a rope. And that is your mindfulness. That is saying you're always connected to whatever it is that you're meditating on by this rope of mindfulness. And when you're trying to escape, the elephant is tugging on that rope and trying to be distracted, you take the goad or the sharp hook of your introspection to keep the elephant in line. Which is to say that when we notice that our mind is getting distracted, when it is veering away from the object that we're supposed to be focused on, it's our introspection that becomes aware of that. It's our mind of awareness or introspection that is looking at our own mind and seeing, are you focused on your object of meditation or have you forgotten it? Are you being distracted by external distractions or internal distractions or not, right? So those two things work together, mindfulness and awareness or introspection. They work, or alertness, I think is how it's translated in this text. They work together to help us tame our mind, control the wild elephant of our mind. And so here he's saying, even if our mind is a crazed elephant, that has the destructive capacity to cause us to be reborn in the lower realms, because our wild mind can cause us to seek out non-virtue. But if we always tie our mind to virtuous activity with the rope of mindfulness, so if we're always aware, if we always have virtuous objects as the focus of our mind, and we use our awareness to make sure that we're not being distracted and that we're not allowing non-virtuous objects to serve as the objects of our attention. So we combine our mindfulness and our awareness in that way, or our mindfulness and our alertness in that way. Then that is what tames our wild elephant mind. And by taming it, not only do we prevent ourselves from falling to the lower realms and engaging in non-virtue, but we also cause us to accumulate virtue, right? So it doesn't just negate the harmful actions, it simultaneously promotes virtuous activity, right? So not only does our fear cease to exist, which is to say our fear of being reborn in the lower realms and our fear that may be caused by external enemies in this life and our fear of suffering in future lives, that fear will cease to exist because we've tamed our mind. But not only that, we also will accumulate all the virtues necessary to have higher rebirth and to achieve good status and good state that will allow us to continue practicing a spiritual path in the future, in this life and in future lives. So by taming the wild elephant of our mind, we're doing both of these things at the same time. We decrease our non-virtue. By doing that, we eliminate fear of suffering, right? Both for the suffering of this life and the suffering of future lives. And we accumulate the virtue that then allows us to experience joy in our spiritual practice in this life and be assured that we will be reborn into higher states of rebirth that allow us to continue engaging in meaningful spiritual practice until we become Buddhas. So all that comes from taming this wild elephant of our mind. And not only that, then building off of that, whatever realizations we are hoping to achieve on this path, right? Whatever, types of practice and realization that we're aiming for, those are going to be easier. And that's just common sense, right? If you're able to have a calm mind and a mind that is under your control and is not, flying off the radar, going wherever it wants all the time, then whatever your goals are, you can achieve them much more easily. So in the same way, if we hope to make progress on our spiritual path, having a tame mind is going to be a benefit to that. It's going to make all of our achievements, all of our realizations come about more easily. So the next two verses remind us about the distinction between outer enemies and inner enemies, right? Tigers, lions, elephants, bears, snakes, and all form of enemies, the guardians, the hell worlds, evil spirits, and cannibals, they will all be bound by binding my mind alone, and will be subdued by subduing my mind alone. So what does that mean, right? We know that if I subdue my mind perfectly, there may still be external enemies that want to cause me harm. In general, we say that by subduing your mind, you eliminate the external enemy, right? And there are examples of even, for instance, Togme Zampo, who composed the 37 practices of Bodhisattva, as well as a commentary on this text. They say that through the taming of his mind, everyone that was in his orbit, their minds were equally tamed, to the extent where his cat stopped hunting mice and stopped eating meat and only ate cream and other things like this, right? I don't know if that's true or not, but they say that, his motivation, his inspiration, even applied to his cat and to other animals like that are in his regard. And they say there are similar stories that, who knows the historical validity of them, but of great beings having such a mind of bodhicitta and being able to tame their mind in such a way that it influences all those around them, including animals and including non-human beings, to turn towards virtue instinctively because they're near such virtuous practice, right? So that's one meaning, potential meaning of this verse, or of these verses, that are these external enemies, whatever they may be, tigers, lions, and so forth, that by subduing my mind, I don't create the object for those external enemies to react against. But the more important meaning is that by taming my mind, by subduing my mind, I may not eliminate the physical threat around me, but I eliminate all fear of that threat. I eliminate all fear of external enemies that I might have in my continuum when I'm able to perfectly subdue my mind and tame my own mind. Here, binding my mind, what that means is making my mind under my own control, right? And not allowing it to seek out non-virtue. And subduing my mind means pacifying all of the afflictions. So by binding my mind, by taming my mind, then even if I'm not able to eliminate the physical external threat, I am able to eliminate my fear of that threat, because I recognize that regardless of what that external enemy may or may not enact upon my body, that is not what's causing me any real suffering. That's not what's causing me actual harm. It's my mind that has the potential to cause me the greatest harm. And when I'm able to subdue my mind, to calm my mind, to totally pacify my mind, then I eliminate the fear that might come from any external threat, which can only threaten my body. And if we continue, these verses are very clear, and they kind of are repeating themselves, so we can go through them a little bit quickly. But if you have doubts or questions, don't feel free to interrupt. Verse 6, though, says, "The perfect teacher himself has shown that in this way all fears as well as boundless miseries originate from the mind," right? So this is just continuing our recognition that by taming the mind, I am able to eliminate all fear of external enemies, and therefore, all of our fear and suffering, they come from the mind. They don't come from the objects that are external to us. Our fear, our suffering doesn't come from whatever it is that's threatening us. It comes from how we react to it, right? You can even think of, let me give a useful example. I don't know. Have you ever? Here's an example. I know. I was oh, this is many, many, many years ago. The summer after my freshman year of college, let's say. I was staying at my college over summer, and we were in the basement of a house that I was living in. And a number of people in that basement, let's just say, were not entirely sober, and they accidentally lit a giant fire, like a very big fire. Uh, and so everyone freaked out, as you can imagine. They're terrified, except for the sober person in the room, who just quietly got up and put the fire out. Just had a blanket, beat it out, no problem, right? So the external threat was the same to the different people, but those who were not in control of their minds experienced great fear and distress. And the one who was in control of his mind was able to not experience fear or distress, but navigate the situation in a meaningful way, in a very easy way, right? So what that shows in a very worldly, coarse example is that we have the ability to experience fear or distress based, or rather, our fear or distress comes from our mind, not from the object itself. So everyone in that basement together was in the same quote unquote like danger of this fire, but one person wasn't afraid because they were calm, they had their wits about them, and they didn't allow themselves to experience fear because they knew how to behave appropriately. And the other people in that room did experience fear because they were not in control of their minds, right? And so instead of reacting in a smart way by eliminating the threat of fire, they freaked out. So the fear didn't come from the fire. The distress didn't come from the fire. It came from the minds of the people experiencing it. It's that way for all of our fear. It's that way for all of our misery, all of our distress. It doesn't come from the object that we're reacting to, right? It's our reaction. You know, if someone robs you, holds you up at knife point or gunpoint, your fear doesn't come from the knife or the gun. It comes from you wanting to protect this body, right? That's where the fear comes from. So the fear isn't from the threat, the enemy, the mugger. It comes from your mind. Now, sometimes that fear may be useful. We've talked in the past about having some emotions, when they propel us towards action, they can be useful. So fear can be useful if it propels us towards virtuous action, right? It's fear of the lower realms that propels us towards taking refuge, or can propel us towards taking refuge. So in that regard, fear can be useful if it propels us towards virtuous action. But if that fear propels us towards non-virtuous action, or it paralyzes us and causes us not to act, then it's no longer useful. And in any event, the fear itself is, whether it's virtuous or beneficial fear, or whether it's non-beneficial fear, is not coming from the external environment. It's coming from the way we react to that environment. That's true for both types of fear. Okay? So the perfect teacher, Shakyamuni himself, he taught us that all of our fear and our countless unimaginable misery, they all come from our mind. The external circumstances may very well be precipitating factors that make that misery, that fear, more easily experienced, right? But the fear itself, the misery itself, the suffering itself, doesn't come from the external factors. It comes from our mind alone.
Venerable, can I ask a question to clarify? So if now that like the war, the distress that it is causing me when I read about it and stuff, so that is the fear, my fear that something similar might happen to me, that war might come to where I live. That's the fear that is causing the distress, is it? And if I didn't have the distress, if I was all fine, I mean, whether the war comes or doesn't come, I'm going to lead the best possible life that I can. If I was so focused, then I wouldn't have the fear. Is that the right way to think?
Well, I think in this example, right, fear and distress are not the same experience. So we can see violence happening in other parts of the world, like this war in Iran, or in Palestine, or in Ukraine, or these other places as well. We can see this war and be distressed by it. It can cause us unhappiness. It can cause, if we see others suffering and have distress, right? So that can even be a virtuous response. That isn't the same thing as fear necessarily. right? So we have to think about, we have to use our practice in meditation to analyze what emotions are coming up. And if it is fear, then what is that fear? Is that fear of the whole world imploding? Is it fear for my own well-being, my own happiness? Is it fear for those people who are close to me that I care about? What is that actual fear, right? We have to analyze that. And it's most likely a combination of those things. Just a general fear for the world in general, the state of things, but also a fear for myself. So we look at that fear and say, what is that fear doing? Is that fear motivating me to then engage in beneficial activity, whatever that may be? That may mean engaging in my own spiritual practice with a more forceful way, or it might mean trying to work with community organizing groups or government groups or making donations or whatever. It may be many different things, right? Is that fear motivating me to engage in virtue, or is that fear paralyzing me and just making me afraid to leave my house and causing even greater distress? So we can separate the distress and the fear and see, are they independent or are they linked? And are they benefiting us in any way? Are they promoting virtuous action, or are they doing the opposite, right? So that's what we have to analyze. And it's not one or the other. For most of us, it's going to be a combination. And so we have to then say, okay, I look at the state of the world and I'm terrified, right? Now, I'm not terrified for my own life and my own body. I'm terrified that our global community seems like it's falling apart. And as a result of that, there's going to be increased suffering for many, many people, not just me, right? So I personally, I'm doing my best not to have fear for my own life, my own suffering, my own needs. And especially I exist in a life where I have a lot of privilege that allows me to not have the immediate fear of those things, right? But I have a generalized fear about the state of the world in general, and saying, how can I live a virtuous life where I'm doing my best to actually serve others, not just in future lives, but in this life, when it seems like everything is going wrong everywhere I look? Like, that's an actual fear, right? That I experience. So then, though, I have to look at that fear and say, what is that fear encouraging me to do? Is that fear benefiting me and encouraging me to be virtuous, encouraging me to double down on my practice, to look for worldly ways that I can be of benefit? Or is that fear just making me stress out all the time, but not actually motivating me to engage in virtue, or even motivating me to engage in worldly benefit? And so when I'm able to analyze that, I can say, is this fear helping me or is it harming me? And if it's helping me, then I allow it to continue to motivate my virtuous activity. But if it's not helping me, I say, okay, this fear is only harming me. So what am I really afraid of? And if I'm simply afraid of my own well-being, I'm afraid of having my own privileges taken away from me, I'm afraid of the war coming to my part of the world or affecting, the people that I care about intimately, then is that fear anything other than self-cherishing? I have to ask myself that. Is it my self-cherishing, saying, I want to be happy, I want to be comfortable, I want things to go my way for me? And if it is, then that's only causing me harm. It's only causing me suffering, right? So there's no one answer to this kind of question. The answer is we have to actually analyze our minds. We have to look at our emotional response to the world around us, and then look at those emotions and say, is this emotion a reactionary response that is based in my own afflictions? Or is it a response that is a measured response that is intentional and is promoting virtuous activity?
Okay.
So, yeah, sorry, it's not an easy answer, unfortunately.
Sure. Thank you, Venerable.
I say all the time that samsara is hard, right? We live in samsara, and samsara is hard. And fear is a very valid response to external threat, okay? This is how a bodhisattva lives. A bodhisattva recognizes that their actual fear doesn't come from the external threat, but from the way they react to that external threat, and that this life and this body, the suffering of this life and this body are very minimal compared to the suffering of the lower realms. And therefore, when they realize that, they have no fear of being harmed, right? For most of us, we don't have that level of conviction, and it's difficult for us to say that. I can say very intellectually, I understand that the suffering in the lower realms is intense, and that no matter what harm could be done to my body in this life, I could be tortured, right? Never mind just killed, I could be tortured. That would not even be a drop in the bucket. That would be the suffering in the lower realms. I understand that intellectually, and I have conviction in it in the sense that I believe it. It's not just intellectual understanding, I believe it. But knowing that, and then not having fear for harm coming to my physical body isn't the same thing, because I haven't fully integrated it, right? And that comes from my meditation practice. So the more I meditate, the more I really develop a strong conviction in it, then I can integrate it into my practice. Now, even a bodhisattva isn't going to go out of their way to put their body in harm, right? They're not going out of their way seeking out danger because they don't have any fear, because their body is still useful. Our bodies are useful because they are the vehicle through which we have the opportunity to practice Dharma. So having no fear for the physical state of your body, because you recognize that suffering comes from the mind, and you recognize that the suffering of the lower realms is much more egregious and much more to be feared. Recognizing that doesn't mean we just like treat our body like it doesn't matter, right? We still want to do our best to take care of our body, to preserve our life as long as possible, because this life is giving us the opportunity to practice the Dharma in a meaningful way. So it's not being mindless about how we treat our body. It's having respect for our body, but it's just also not letting fear for bodily harm overwhelm or mediate how we engage in the world around us. Right? So that's an important distinction. And it's important to recognize that since we're not bodhisattvas, we only can aspire towards this. We do our best to cultivate these minds, recognizing that we're doing the best we can. But being afraid, when you look at the world and it looks like there are fascist leaders taking power in multiple countries all over the world, when you see different wars breaking out, whether it be civil wars or wars between multiple countries, when you see, gross poverty and injustice all over the world, distress is an appropriate response, and fear is not an inappropriate response if that fear is encouraging us to engage in virtue, and it isn't simply fear for my own immediate well-being, right? So it's not a wildly inappropriate response. We just need to analyze it and say, is this helping me or is this harming me? But samsara is hard. This is what's going to happen in samsara. Our lives are filled with opportunities to experience distress, because samsara itself has the very nature of dissatisfaction. So to expect to have lives free from that while being samsaric beings is, a folly. It's because of this, though, that we need to continually bind our mind to virtue, right? When we're guarding our mind, what we're doing, at least as taught in this text right now, in this part of the text, our main practice, it should be taking our mind, taking the rope of mindfulness and binding it to virtuous objects, right? We tame our mind by binding it to virtue, and we use introspection to make sure that we're not being distracted from that virtue. And by doing that, that helps eliminate our fear, because a virtuous mind doesn't have the bandwidth to have these kind of fears, because a virtuous mind recognizes that all it's doing is creating opportunities for happiness and success in this life and in future lives. So in this way, we protect our mind by constantly binding it to virtue, which is why when we think of the different types of morality, right, we have the morality of restraint, which is restraining from engaging in negative actions, but also the morality of engaging in virtuous activities, of collecting virtuous dharmas. That is a type of morality, because one way to tame our mind is by constantly binding our mind to virtue. That's why that's a type of morality. It's one way to subdue our mind. Continuing in this
Venerable,
regard.
sir,
Yes, Prakash. Is this related to
is
this
it the
topic?
same thing? Yeah, it is. Like,
Okay.
since we were discussing on fear, like, for
Mm.
example, when we meditate, mind gets distracted, but again, we have to bring it to breath over and over again. So, same way, like, I'm working, like, and if my mind is going to the fears, what will happen in the future or in the past? Again and again, I have to bring it to the work I'm doing in the same manner.
Well, yeah, is that fear actually causing you to engage in meaningful and virtuous activity? Or is that fear causing you distress that is not benefiting you? So that's what you have to ask, And so in the immediate moment, you have to look at that fear and say, what is this fear doing right now? What do I need to do to overcome this fear to continue engaging in meaningful actions right now? And then when you're not experiencing that fear, so when you are back home or when you have the opportunity to engage in deep reflection or contemplation, then you look at that fear from the safety of your meditation cushion, let's say, and you say, where is that fear coming from? Is that fear really coming from my self-cherishing mind? Is that fear coming from something else? And is that fear offering me benefit, or is it only offering me distress and pain and misery, right? So in the immediate moment of experiencing fear, you can develop strategies such as, taking a moment to meditate on the breath to center yourself, to focus on the immediate task at hand, and not let your mind be distracted and look at the future or worry about the past, but be present in the immediate moment, right? That can be a strategy for when you experience that fear in the middle of a workday, let's say. But more important than that is you also have to do the work when you're not experiencing that fear. You have to do the deep work of actually looking at your mind and saying, where is this fear coming from? Is it coming from a place of virtue, or is it coming from my self-cherishing mind that's only seeking out the happiness of this life alone and is prioritizing my own needs above the needs of others? Right? What is motivating this fear? So you have to do that work, and that is not work you can do when you're experiencing the fear, whatever the fear may be. Right? That's work you have to do when you have some relative level of safety to do a level of introspection. So that's true for all of our fears, right? We have to develop, and all of our afflicted minds, not just our fears, we have to develop strategies to navigate them when they emerge in the immediate sense. And then we have to develop strategies to overcome them, to prevent them from coming in the future. So if we look at whatever our afflicted minds are, we have to develop strategies to help when we notice, if I notice that right now my mind is experiencing anger and I'm about to act in a way that is inappropriate because I'm cultivating anger. When I notice that, I have to have a strategy of how I deal with that, right? I have to try to develop some sort of emotional resource that says, okay, I see this anger, I see it coming, and I know that anger is only going to harm me. So therefore, I will do X, Y, and Z to help subdue this anger. That's not totally eliminating the anger, but it is allowing me to overcome it temporarily to do something else instead, right? So most often it depends on what this kind of anger is. But for instance, in anger, we would say then we want to meditate on love. So take a minute to calm our mind and to generate love, because anger itself is going to be directed at an object, right? An object that we are ascribing these characteristics or superimposing these characteristics of disgust and dislike towards and aversion towards, right? So then we look at that object and wish it to have every happiness and every cause of happiness and try to develop love in response to that object instead of anger. And that will cause our anger to be subdued in that moment if we're able to do so. So that's an immediate strategy. We have to have those immediate strategies. But then we also have to do the work to try to prevent that anger from ever being generated in the first place. That can't happen when we're in the grip of anger, right? Getting rid of desire can't happen when we're in the grip of it, you know? Getting rid of seeking out praise and getting rid or seeking out compliments can't happen when our minds are totally infatuated with those things. So we have to have two different types of action. One is when we have time and space to engage in practice, right? So our regular meditation practice. This is why that's so important, because that's creating an opportunity for us to actually do the deep kind of work. But then we also have to have immediate strategies to deal with the emotions when they actually emerge, right? So you can see how these two things work together, because first, by actually developing our meditation, by trying to understand our mind, by trying to tame our mind and gain some control of our mind, so our mind isn't a wild elephant, that we have at least, if that rope of mindfulness isn't always tied to a stake, at least we've got it in hand, right? We can do something with it. Doing some work on our mind allows us to then see those negative emotions when they're arising. It may not prevent them from arising, especially at the beginning, but we can at least see when they're arising before we fall under their sway, right? Before we go and say that harmful thing or engage in that violent action, we can see, oh, wait, I'm being motivated by anger right now. So the anger's already arisen, but due to our meditation practice, due to our own familiarity with our own mind, we prevent that anger from causing us to engage in further non-virtue. And then, so we have to have some strategy. Once we recognize that anger, we develop some strategy to help subdue it. And then, so that's the beginning part of our meditation practice. And then our meditation practice, once we become more familiar with it, not only does it allow us to observe that anger, but the deeper our meditation is, it prevents that anger from arising in the first place. So meditation works, like I said in the beginning, our meditation is beneficial in the beginning and middle and the end. It's beneficial in the beginning because it is preparing our mind to actually receive the teachings. It's preparing our mind to see itself, to understand how it exists in the world. It's beneficial in the middle because it is actually doing the work of integrating our spiritual aspirations with our everyday life, right? It's doing the work of transformation. And it's beneficial at the end because when we've done that work, we are then able to analyze our own activities, our own mental activities and physical activities, and see if they're in line with our spiritual aspirations or not. And it's through our meditation that we're able to gain insight into how we're operating in the world. So we need to have a meditation practice that encompasses all of our life, right? And that is coupled with strategies to navigate difficult experiences when they arise, recognizing those will be band-aids, right? When I'm out in the middle of a group of people and I experience anger or desire or any negative emotion, I have to have a band-aid or a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. But then I have to be able to go meditate to help actually close the wound. So those are two different things we have to do simultaneously, or two different strategies, or two different rather practices we have to adopt and encourage simultaneously because they work together, right? They don't work in isolation. This goes back to the idea that we have to have an unmistaken method. We have to have a method that's combining our practices of wisdom and merit, our practices of wisdom and bodhicitta. We can't say that this one practice is going to solve all of my problems, but instead we have to adopt a holistic approach that says we need multiple practices that are going to be applied in different scenarios. So we have a long-term goal and the immediate goal, and we do both at the same time, right? So with that, maybe we can cover a few more verses today. I think we might end a little early today because I'm feeling sick, and so my throat is getting quite sore. But I have time. I have a little bit in me left, so we can do a few more verses. The next two verses, right?
Venerable sir.
Excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry to hear about your throat, and I won't take much of your time, but just one last question, please.
If
So
it's
when
directly
you
related to this text, we can do. Otherwise, maybe we can do a little later. Okay. I'd like to get through a few more verses, and we can save. If there's time at the end, we can do a question.
okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so let's go through verse 7 and 8 because they go together, right? So this is again looking at, if we think of where we just came from, the verse 6 reminding us that the Buddha Shakyamuni himself said that all of our fear and our misery comes from our mind, right? This is then elaborating on that. Who intentionally created all those weapons for those in hell? Who created the burning iron ground? From where did all those women in hell ensure? The Mighty One has said that all such things are the workings of an evil mind. Hence, within the 3 world spheres, there is nothing to fear other than my mind. So an evil mind, that's not the maybe best translation, more a negative or a non-virtuous mind, right? So what this is saying is that especially the hell realms and the hungry ghost realm, the way they exist, all of the sufferings we experience there, those experiences of suffering come from our own mind. In the same way that our experiences of suffering in this life come from our mind. So it's not saying that the lower realms exist like a dream or something like that. They actually exist. They have a physical presence. We aren't able to experience it as humans, right? And for the most part, humans aren't able to experience the other realms with the exception of the animal realm. But there are some humans that can due to their own karma and their own practice and their own realization. In the same way, other beings, like a hell realm being, isn't able to experience a human realm. If they were here right now, they wouldn't experience the world around us the way we do because they don't have the karma or the senses that allow them to experience what we're experiencing. And there are some exceptions, right? There are some harmful spirits that don't exist in the human realm, but they can interact with the human realm. So we say in the understanding of cosmology, that does exist. But for the most part, the different realms of existence, with the exception of the animal realm and the human realm, their karma and the way their minds create the experiences of the world around them, it limits them to their own realm of existence, right? And so we say that all of our suffering in hell, so all of the fierce hell guardians that are holding these giant blades that are slicing our bodies up, or the fierce ground that is made of molten iron, that itself, the experience of suffering that comes from those things, is all created by our mind. Right? It's not to say that they don't exist, right? But it's saying that our experience of them as suffering, or the experience of the hell being who's experiencing them as suffering, is due to their own mind. And in the same way, this line here, just to be clear, where did all the women come from in hell? That sounds very, very tantalizing, scandalous. It's specifically referencing, if you study the hell realms, one of the neighboring hell realms, it talks about what are called shamali trees, or trees whose leaves are all knives and swords that are pointed downward. And for beings that are reborn in that hell realm, they say they are beautiful women at the top of the trees. And so you can't help but try to climb these trees to reach these beautiful women. But all you do is slice your body up into ribbons by climbing these trees that are made of swords, or whose leaves are made of swords. So that's what this is referencing when it says, where did all these women in hell come from? Right? We're saying that woman, if we want to call it a woman, it's really a projection of our own mind, of our own desire. It came from our own mind, or from the mind of that hell being who's experiencing that, right? That's what that's referencing. It's not saying that all women are hellish, so don't take it that way. That sometimes you get a little bit of misogyny, or what sounds like misogyny, that it isn't really. So that's not what this is. This is just saying that in the hell realm, there's this manifestation sometimes of these trees whose swords, or whose blades are made of swords, whose leaves are made of swords. And the reason we climb them is because there's this object of lust that exists at the top of them that we're attracted to, right? But that object of lust, the experience of that desire that we're willing to experience such great suffering in this hell realm, comes from our mind, right? There isn't some external thing forcing that desire on us. That desire is coming from us. And then the Mighty One has said all things come from the evil mind. So here he means the non-virtuous mind, not evil as in there's no not inherently evil, but the non-virtuous mind is what is creating all these types of suffering. And here then it says within the three world spheres. So that simply means it can either mean the desire realm, the form realm, and the formless realm. So all sentient beings exist in one of these three realms. It could also mean all sentient beings who exist above, below, and on top of the earth. When we say the three world spheres, either of those, it can have either of those meanings. We see references to those in the teachings of the Buddha. It's basically just saying that no matter what realm of samsara you're born into, that's what the point is by saying the three world spheres. No matter where in samsara you take rebirth, any suffering and fear and any experience of suffering and fear you have is going to be coming from your own mind. And therefore, even if you're born into a godly realm, the object, you still have your mind, so you still have an object that can cause you to fear, right? So here it says there's nothing to fear other than your own mind. So you're not actually fearing your mind, but you're recognizing that your mind is what has the capacity to cause you great suffering. But in the same way, as I mentioned earlier, it is also your mind that is the source of your liberation, right? So it's not like we should just be terrified of our mind in general. We should recognize that our mind is what gives us the capacity to be free from suffering, but it's also the chains that bind us to suffering. It's both, right? So we shouldn't be afraid of our mind. We should respect our mind, recognize that our mind is powerful in that way, and therefore we cultivate it and protect it and guard it and use it to seek out virtue and avoid non-virtue, because it has the capacity to cause us great suffering in the future, such as our mind itself, when it is not guarded, when it is not tamed, when it is just following its worldly instincts, causes us to engage in non-virtue, accumulate negative karma, be reborn in the hell realms. That's due to our mind, right? But when we tame our mind, when we use wisdom to analyze what is appropriate to adopt and what is appropriate to abandon, and then we use that to seek out virtue, then it's our mind that causes us to engage in virtuous actions, that create the causes and conditions to be reborn in the upper realms, to make spiritual progress, to find peace, contentment in this life, to find out ways to be of service to others, to bring happiness, worldly happiness and spiritual happiness to others, and eventually achieve Buddhahood. That's also our mind, right? So it isn't just a source of misery and destruction. It's both, right? And we have to hold that. We can't say that our happiness comes from our mind, but our suffering comes from outside of us. And in the same way, we can't say that our suffering comes from our mind, but our happiness comes from outside of us. Because either of those two views are ceding our own power and our own autonomy and not actively recognizing the nature of reality, right? We need to hold both. Both our suffering and our happiness come from our mind. That our mind is that powerful and has that capacity, okay? When we're talking, especially in this verse, and in this context, we're only focusing on the capacity of our mind to cause us suffering in the future, because the whole point is trying to tame our mind. So that's what the focus is. Okay, there's a reason it's focused that way, because that's the context of this chapter. We're learning to develop introspection and awareness as a way of practicing morality, because the way that the Bodhisattvas practice the perfection of morality is by taming their mind and then allowing their mind or encouraging their mind towards virtue only, right? Both of those are types of morality. The morality of restraining from harmful activity, the morality of restraining from seeking out their own liberation alone, and the morality of engaging in virtuous activities that benefit others. So that is how a bodhisattva engages in the practice of the perfection of morality, using conscientiousness as the basis, that awareness, and then alertness that analyzes when their mind is off track. Okay, so that's the context this is in. But it's important for us as students to remember both. That in this context, we're focusing on the mind as being the potential to cause us all of our suffering, but at the same time, we can't forget that it's our mind that causes our happiness as well. So the next section, maybe we'll just start it briefly. The next section, it comes under the category of recognizing that kind of just what I said here. Not only is our suffering and our misery coming from our mind, but also whatever good qualities we have also come from our mind. All of our virtuous practices also come from the mind, right? And they rely upon having a tamed and restrained mind. So the next verses, verse 9 through verse 17, show the ways that the 6 perfections all rely upon having a mind that is tamed and restrained. Right? So verses 9 and 10 show how the mind of generosity, the perfection of generosity, depends upon having a restrained mind. And it comes from the mind alone. And then verse 11 is how morality itself is dependent on the mind alone. Verses 12 through 14 are how patience are dependent on the mind alone. 15 is how joyful effort. 16 is how concentration. And 17 is how wisdom all depend on the mind alone. So all of our good qualities depend on the mind alone, right? So maybe we'll just do the first one, the how generosity depends on the mind alone, and then we'll see how we feel after that, right? So verses 9 and 10 are describing that, and they say, if the perfection of generosity were the actual alleviation of world's poverty, then, since beings are still starving now, in what manner did the previous Buddhas ever perfect it? The perfection of generosity is said to be the thought to give all beings everything, together with the fruit of such a thought. Hence, it is simply a state of mind. So if you say that the perfection of generosity actually means all beings receiving everything they need, then that would mean there's no one has ever achieved the perfection of generosity because there are beings that are still experiencing need, right? But we know that there are bodhisattvas and Buddhas who have perfected the practice of the perfection of generosity. And yet, there are sentient beings who have needs. Therefore, the perfection of generosity, it can't be the actual fulfillment of every sentient being receiving everything they need, but instead, the perfection of generosity is the mind that wishes, the thought that wishes to give all being everything they need, along with the fruit of that thought. So what it means by the fruit of that thought, or the result of that thought, is the action itself. Not the object that beings receive, but the action of giving. So the perfection of generosity is the mind that wishes to give, along with the action of giving. Those are both the perfection of generosity, and those both are coming from a state of mind only, right? The actual receipt of giving, whether it be giving of material goods, giving of Dharma, or giving of fearlessness, whatever it may be, the object itself being received, the receipt of those things, that is not the perfection of generosity. And simply giving objects to others is not the perfection of generosity, but the wish to give for the purpose of your own achievement of Buddhahood, the wish to give to others, and then the actions, the result of that wish, which is to say, engaging in the action, that is the perfection of generosity. Okay, so that itself is a state of mind. And so if we don't have a tame mind, if we don't have a restrained mind, if we haven't done the work to guard our mind, then you're never going to be able to develop the perfection of generosity because it's dependent upon you having some control over your mind, recognizing how your mind's engaging in the world around you, right? Realizing when your mind is distracted and not distracted, making sure your mind is bound to virtue and not to non-virtue. So in that way, the perfection of generosity, this good quality itself is a state of mind. It means it's dependent upon introspection and conscientiousness, which are these two qualities of mind that we're focusing on as how we guard our mind from samsara, which is to say, how we bring about all of our happiness and how we prevent all of our misery. Maybe we will end our discussion of the text there. We can look at the other perfections next week maybe. With that, do we have any questions about this text specifically or about any of the things we talked about today? And if not, we'll have a little bit of time
Venerable.
for general questions. Yes, go ahead.
So one question which I wanted to ask earlier, so like you said, like if I'm having fear, like I need to understand whether I am engaged in a virtuous activity, and try to bring my mind to that, right? Instead of being gripped in fear, I to understand whether what is that fear? Is it like constructive fear? Is it pushing me towards action, or is it stopping me from doing a virtuous activity? So when we say virtuous activity, like if I'm doing just my daily job, so when we say virtuous activity, it should mean like providing useful service to my bosses and my company, so that
Well, no, look at your job and say when you go about your daily job, what is your motivation? Right? And so that this goes back to how the self-cherishing mind affects everything we do and how compassion can affect everything we do. So if I'm going about my daily work, if I'm working in an office building and I go about my daily work that has on the surface, it has nothing to do with spiritual practice, right? I look at my motivation and say, why am I going about this work? Is it because I just want to have a lot of money so I can buy nice things? Is it because I want to impress the people around me and, become popular? Or is it because I recognize that I need to engage in community if I want to live in this place in this time? I need to have some sort of funding to make sure I can take care of my body. And I need to develop the means, or I need to cultivate the means that give me access to then studying the Dharma and engaging in spiritual practice. In order to do that, I need to have good lodging, I need to have food, I need to have certain things that allow me to do that. So what is your motivation? Is your motivation saying, how can I benefit all sentient beings? The best way to benefit sentient beings is to study the Dharma, to engage in the practice of taming my own mind. And in order to do that, I need to have certain levels of resources. And so therefore, I'm going about this very worldly activity in order to accumulate those resources that then propel me towards Dharma, that give me the means and resources to make offerings to the Buddha Dharma Sangha, that give me the opportunity to have an apartment or a house where I can sit and meditate and study and do these things. Is that the motivation? Or it's because I want popularity, I want money, I want nice things, I want my boss to like me, I want my company to make a lot of money. What is the motivation, right? So your external actions can look the same, but the motivation is different. So that's what you have to look at, is the motivation. And so then the fear is going to come, at least in response, in part to your motivation, right? So if your motivation is that you want to be of service to others and you recognize this is the way you can do it, that this is giving you the means and opportunity to help others, and then if the fear is losing your position, then that fear might encourage you to engage in more virtuous activity, which is to say, develop positive motivations and seek to go about doing your work in such a way that you ensure that it benefits others. But if the fear is because, hey, I really want to, buy a new car, and if I don't get this raise, I'm not going to be able to do that, then that fear isn't actually encouraging you to be virtuous. It's just encouraging your self-cherishing mind. So you really have to look at whatever is motivating your actions. And most of the time, our actions are going to be mixed. Like, that's just the truth, right? Even those of us that are doing our best to practice a spiritual path, we're going to have mixed motivations, especially if we don't put in the effort to try to make them as pure as possible. But it is possible. Lama Zopa Rinpoche very clearly says, we can live a life where every single thing we do becomes a spiritual practice if we live with compassion. I think Lama Zopa says, there's this very famous quote, live with compassion, work with compassion, meditate with compassion. When problems arise, we experience them with compassion. We die with compassion. We enjoy with compassion. By practicing this, it makes a happy life and fulfills all of our wishes and all of other beings' wishes, right? So by living with compassion in this way, we can take compassion as a motivating factor that mediates every single thing we do, whether it be a worldly activity or a spiritual activity, right? So it's the motivation that determines whether our actions are spiritual or worldly. And so that is what I mean by analyzing what your experiences are at work and looking at your motivation. So then you see what that fear is coming from. What are you actually afraid of? If that fear is a worldly fear, or is it a fear that is encouraging you to follow virtue? Okay.
Thank you so much, Venerable. So will fear go away when we think like this? Like I'm engaged in a virtuous activity. Will fear go away?
It can, like I said, it depends. It's going to depend on what the fear is, right? So if the fear is a beneficial fear, then as long we can put it this way, this is actually a specific verse that comes up later in chapter 5. One of the most famous verses in the Bodhisattva comes up in this chapter. It won't be for a while, but the summary of it. This is not the word for word translation, but it says, when something difficult arises, if there's something I can do about it, then why worry? And when something difficult arises, if there's nothing I can do about it, then why worry? Right? So it's pointing out that when you have that fear, you say, what's that fear based on? Is there something I can do that can change the situation that will alleviate that fear? And if there is, what's the point of being fearful? There's an action I can take. There's something I can do that can allow me to create better circumstances. Or is there nothing I can do? If there's nothing I can do, then what is the point of that fear? It's not helping me because there's nothing I can do to change the circumstances, right? So in order for our fear, our concern, our worry to go away, we have to actually analyze, is this fear useful? And if it is, then we allow it to cause us to engage in virtue, and then it's no longer needed. Or if it's holding us back, then what's the point? We can't do anything about it, right? So the fear may go away. It should go away once you analyze what the cause of it is. If you recognize that it's only a worldly fear, then you work on getting rid of the self-cherishing mind and whatever other worldly motivations are encouraging that fear. And you realize that nothing that you could experience, any suffering that you may experience, is not going to be nearly as bad as the potential consequences of engaging in non-virtue, right? Because the potential consequences of engaging in non-virtue are being reborn in a lower realm. So nothing you experience in this life can be that bad, and therefore there's no reason to have fear. That fear is not useful. Or if that fear is encouraging virtue, then it no longer becomes fear, but it becomes a motivating factor that is pursuing a spiritual path, right? Okay.
Thank you, Venerable.
Yes. Any other questions?
Thank you for your guidance.
Okay. If there are no other questions today, sorry for us ending a little early, but I'm a little sore and I don't want to push it too much. I start debate today, right? Our monastery, our academic schedule is starting again today. And so starting it with a little bit of illness is not the greatest way to go. So I'm trying to at least protect a little bit. It's hard to scream on the debate courtyard if you don't have a voice, right? So I got to do my best. Let's take a moment to recognize that by engaging in our study today and looking at our own minds and in doing our best to have the attitudes of being nonpartisan and intelligent and diligent as we put ourselves to Shantideva's text and to how it can transform our lives by transforming our minds, we have accumulated some sort of virtue, right? Some sort of merit, some good karma. And instead of wishing for that karma to benefit us alone, we wish that merit might ripen on other sentient beings. That whatever merit we've accumulated, we wish that we could give it away, that it may cause other beings to be free from suffering. And especially that it may ripen in our own achievement of Buddhahood, because by achieving Buddhahood quickly, that'll give us the best opportunity to be of service to others. So we dedicate our merit in that way, that our merit may bring about the elimination of suffering of all sentient beings, that any sentient beings experiencing physical or mental suffering may be quickly free from that suffering, that all sentient beings without a teacher may quickly meet perfect Mahayana virtuous friend, and that all sentient beings might have all their wishes fulfilled in accordance with the Dharma, and that we ourselves might quickly and more quickly become perfectly enlightened Buddhas so that we might be of maximum benefit to others. And with this in mind, we'll just offer a few brief dedication prayers. Oh, not that one. Sorry. These ones. So we will offer this first prayer once in Tibetan, this first verse rather, once in Tibetan and once in English, and then we'll offer the next two prayers in English, okay? Jantu sen chorim poche ma ke panam ke gyoche ke wanyam pa me pa yang gone gonde pewa sho. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigratory beings who make extremely clear the path that is unification of emptiness and compassion. To the lotus holder, Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. May the glorious Guru's lives be long and stable. May all beings equaling the extent of space have happiness. May I and others without exception accumulate merit, purify negativities, and may we be blessed to quickly attain Buddhahood. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining me
Thank
this
you
morning.
so
I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Venerable Lekden, for teaching us today on this wonderful book. Next weekend, we will not be having teachings on Saturday, but we'll be having Sok at the center. It will be led by Venerable Lekden, and then at the center on Sunday, we'll be having teachings. I will send you all a detailed mail. Now, if you all can stand up and do 3 prostrations before we end the class. Thank you all.
Thank
The
you, everyone.
center is also
Have a good day.
organizing a retreat next month. Details have been sent by email and WhatsApp. Kindly consider if you want to register and be part of it. It's going to happen at the Seraji Monastery. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.